The Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on our podcast. His name is Josh Kelly, and he's with a party called the Yankee Nationalist Party. So welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
If you could get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Absolutely. So I'm Josh Kelly. I'm from Waterford, Connecticut, and I've had quite a versatile background in politics and political science in general. So I actually started my career, studying opera and vocal performance at Ithaca College in New York.
Wow.
And obviously, I've changed tracks a little bit and realized that I was studying what really should be my kind of extracurricular passion and vice versa. So I switched, studied political science, ran for office a couple times while I was in college and shortly thereafter. Won my races while being a part of the Green Party of the United States, another third party. And, since then, I have gone on to get my master's in public administration. I worked as a city manager in northwestern Connecticut for a few years, and in another on the eastern side of the state as town administrator for a few years. And now I'm back working as the executive director of a nonprofit in southeastern Connecticut, where I'm from. And I've, in that time, been working with the Democratic Party to really try and further just the message of we won't stand for the authoritarianism that we're seeing out of the Trump right-wing MAGA group. But there's obviously something to be desired from, I think, both political parties, and that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it. And so I have put together, and I'm working with a small group right now, but growing very rapidly since the inauguration, the Yankee National Party, that is focused on really four key values, and those being independence, democracy, empathy, and sustainability. And we're trying to bring these values back to government, make sure that Northeast and Northeastern states have their values protected at this time when there's so much government overreach in Washington, and do what we can to make sure that democracy is preserved. We are hanging on by a thread. Democracy is a very fragile thing. And we want to make sure that regardless of what's happening in Washington, that at the very least our Northeastern Bloc coalition is protected, and to try and help pave a path forward for any other states that feel that they too need to step away and have more autonomy from the federal government, have the means to do that.
Okay, so that's the independence part of, you said one of your four values is the Northeastern states being independent from the rest of the states, right?
So it's a process, right? We understand that it's not realistic to say that tomorrow we should all wake up and we should be two separate countries or multiple separate countries. So it's a process that we are advocating for. We do believe in each state's right to self-determination. We don't believe that it's constitutional to disallow or bar any state from leaving the union if it so chooses on its own of its own free will. But we do have an understanding that we need to take this step by step. The first step is to make sure that the individual constitutions of our states that fall within our Northeastern Bloc are protecting the rights of citizens that seem to be eroding at the federal level. Step two is to try and create a Northeastern Congress or Parliament, if you will, that where some powers can be devolved from the federal government to our regional association. And if we're unsuccessful in these areas and things continue to get worse at the federal level, then of course we will continue to pave that path forward for true independence.
Okay. So generally, we know what we're talking about when we mention Northeast. If you want to clarify the states you have in mind, that would be great.
Yeah, Northeast means something a little different to everybody, right? And one of the reasons that we're not the New England National Party is because we want to be inclusive. There is a group of states that we believe share our values, and that's been reflected in a lot of the federal votes that have happened recently and elections that have happened. And those include, but are not necessarily limited to, New York, New Jersey, perhaps even as far as Pennsylvania, Delaware, and other states in that area. Our primary focus right now is on New England and New York.
Okay, got you. So again, also for what states are in New England to clarify?
New England being the 6 states, including Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine.
Okay, great. Okay,
hmm
so you mentioned that about the Trump regime, and different people view it differently. Some view Trump as this libertarianish figure who is, like he says, draining the swamp, and other people see him as an authoritarian figure. So do you think he's a mix of both, or do you think he's one way or the other?
I think that the rhetoric, and this is a tough needle to thread. As a political scientist, actually, my senior thesis in college was all on fascism versus Trumpism. What's the difference? Is there a difference? And the answer is Trump meets almost every definition of fascism that one can find. There is, and if you go back, there are a few key political theorists in the early 20th century that wrote a lot about fascism, of course, including Umberto Eco. And, he really posits that there are several key tenets of fascism. But that includes attacking the media, and making sure that there is, false information that's being spread at different points in time and using that to one's advantage. And using information to do things like, further an imperialist agenda, which we're seeing right now with Gaza, with Greenland, with Panama, with Canada. The list seems to go on and on. The rhetoric that's coming out of Trump during his campaign seems to be very libertarian. We're going to put America first. We're going to focus internally. We're going to make things better here. But then as soon as he gets in office, we're looking all of a sudden external. We're going to be taking over these other places. We're going to be conquering. We need to take back what somehow is rightly ours in his eyes. And creating an enemy out of those other individuals externally outside of the United States. We've seen this before. We've seen it in other fascist regimes. And we know that when you start having a fascist regime look externally, it's ended in the past in World War. I'm not here to say that, that's 100% guaranteed the direction that this country's going. I'm hopeful that different decisions will be made by the Trump administration, but the bottom line is we have been hoping for a long time, hoping that the Democrats find a way to, regain their base, find a way to help people in need, change the status quo in a way that's really meaningful for working Americans. We've been hoping for a long time that the Republicans are going to pull away from this authoritarian streak that we're seeing within the Trump administration. It's time to put the hope aside and have somebody stand up and say, enough's enough. These two parties have both failed us in both similar and uniquely different ways at different times. And make sure that we are, we're all in this together. And when we look at a regional party versus a party that's based on ideology, I think we have a unique opportunity as the Yankee National Party to put the needs of our region and put the values of our region at the forefront of our message, and to get a wider base. We can have both former Trump supporters and former Biden supporters, former Obama supporters, et cetera, under one banner saying we are here to stand for a semblance of democracy returning to the Northeast, self-governance for the Northeast, and a level of empathy and returning to a cultural norm of having, just kind dialogue when we have disagreements as opposed to riots in the streets. Nazi rallies becoming the norm. I'm seeing more and more videos out of Ohio and other places across the country where people are scared, and people are also emboldened to act in a politically violent manner. So empathy is really important to us, and sustainability too. We're not here to say that the climate disaster is a foregone conclusion and there's nothing we can do about it. We need to take action now, and we need to make sure that our communities are in a resilient at a resilient point, and that we also have the opportunity to really create some sustainability economically. The United States, for so long, has been a country that has continued to try and grow and multiply its economic impact on the world stage. It's not realistic to expect that we are going to grow endlessly. We have a finite number of resources, a finite number of people, and we continue to have a growing impoverished population here in the U.S. and a growing disparity between the economic elite and those everyday workers that we are a part of, that we all live among. So trying to really focus on these four key values is what sets the Yankee National Party apart from Trump and his authoritarianism, the failures of the Democratic Party to change the status quo in a meaningful way. And I'm hopeful that both of those major parties will reflect internally and make some changes, but we're past the point where we should be relying on hope alone.
Sure. Well, that's a lot of stuff you mentioned there, that there's a lot of things we could talk about
Absolutely.
from what you said. So one thing I'm wondering about is, it sounds like you're very thoughtful about the use of the term fascist. I remember I read it somewhere when I was in college that they said a lot of people who throw the term around don't know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think any other U.S. presidents were in the fascist direction? People called George Bush fascist, the second one. So, but he's compared to Trump, Trump is many degrees worse.
Right. So, yes, I agree with that statement. I believe that Trump everyone's on a continuum, right? We're somewhere between, I don't necessarily know what you want to call the antithesis of fascism, maybe anarchy and fascism, is a continuum that you could consider. Trump is much further along in a fascist direction. And it has to do not just with his authoritarian tendencies, because I think that there are a lot of people in the U.S. Sorry, I'm in the office right now. I've got some noise happening in the background.
I didn't hear anything, so that's okay.
Oh, okay. We'll keep on going. So, it's not just authoritarianism. I think that a lot of people look at George W. Bush, Obama, creating these executive orders, using executive powers to send the military overseas without congressional approval in some cases.
Yep.
What have you. There's a lot of executive authority within the federal government, and you're libertarian, and this exists both on the left and the right, and I don't think that there's a lot of appreciation for that within the two major parties. Libertarianism does not belong to the right wing. There are left libertarians who believe that the government can have a reasonable level of control over the economy and making sure that it's a fair and equitable marketplace in order for the free market to work well and not get bogged down in things like monopoly and so forth, and still have those anti-authoritarian feelings on a more social scale. So I think that people on both sides are taking a look right now at all of the options that have been presented to them in the last 3-4 decades on the federal level and are saying, yeah, it all feels fascist, right? It all feels like total government overreach. We don't want it. We're rejecting it. And I do think that, unfortunately, it's led to misuse of the word fascist in the past. But what we're looking at here today with Donald Trump and using that term a little bit more thoughtfully, like I said, it's about using misinformation and disinformation. It's about the authoritarian streak. It's about scapegoats, finding whether it's immigrants, whether it's a gender, it's DEI, it's the woke ideology. It's about having scapegoats to place blame on another group so that you are able to rally and unify your base of strength, which, of course, for Donald Trump is your average white person. And not all, but of course, on average, that seems to be the trend. And there's more, of course, that goes into it. But I do think, and I hope that anybody who's listening will take a look at some of the writings of some of our political philosophers. It's not always the most interesting thing, but really trying to understand what is it to be liberal, what is it to be conservative, what is it to be fascist. These are terms that are thrown around so much. It's come to mean almost nothing, especially when you have political rivals trying to pin titles on each other. No, Obama was not a Stalinist. No, is Donald Trump a Nazi? Nazi's a bit of a stretch because he's not necessarily targeting Jews. He's not necessarily talking about, putting people to death. But there are definitely trends in a fascist direction that are undeniable.
Okay. Wow. Well, yes. Okay. Yes. So one time we had a meeting of this organization. Our organization existed in another form a while back when I was in
Mm-hmm.
college, and we had a meeting, and somebody said the difference between authoritarianism and fascism was authoritarianism basically is a government that you have to obey, but it doesn't have an ideology. So you can, as long as you don't interfere with what they do, you're going to be fine. Whereas fascism is more of a comprehensive approach to life, where you have to follow a specific ideology or belief system, or else you're not going to fit in.
That's a decent way of putting it. Yeah, I think that, of course, it's hard to boil things down into one or two sentences, but I think that you've pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think that fascism is something that falls under the umbrella of authoritarianism, so you could be in both a fascist and an authoritarian regime at once. Authoritarian is something where you have that rule of the federal government being harsh and being dramatic. I would say that we have had authoritarian tendencies in a lot of the presidents that we've seen in the past. But this new requirement to live your life in a very specific way, in a way that where you can't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, in a way where we are more quote-unquote God-fearing, and we are unwilling to engage with things like a woman's right to choose because it stands against religious moral principles, that we're unwilling to work with immigrants because they're foreign and they deserve to be somehow exiled. This way of life, I think, speaks to, just as you said, a prescriptive approach to how someone should approach and be a part of and engage with society in the United States, and therefore could be deemed as fascist.
Great information. Not great in the sense that it's a good trend. It's a great analysis of it.
Yes, precisely.
So would you say that when because you're the Yankee National Party, so would you say that when the United States added the other states besides the original states, that changed the dynamic of the country, whereas the country did stuff it wouldn't do otherwise?
It did, obviously the 13 original colonies, you had northern and southern states, and one of the huge divides there was the question of slavery. And by no means is the North free of guilt from that. The North was a huge provider of slaves, and a lot of the slave trade originated in the North. And I think that we forget about that a lot sometimes. It wasn't just the Southern economy piece. But when it comes to the societal trends in the United States, there is a clear divide even still today between your more northern and your more southern and midwestern states versus even the West Coast. How has that all played out year by year, decade by decade? We would be here for a long time if we tried to really dissect how did we get where we are today from the addition of each individual state. There are some states that the addition of the voice of a given state within the union has been very positive over time. There are others that I would say certainly haven't contributed to an ideology and lifestyle that I'm a proponent of and that I'm comfortable with. But at the end of the day, we're seeing states that previously, that just in 2020 rejected the authoritarian nature and the fascist trend of a Donald Trump presidency, rejected that. Now in 2024 saying, all right, not all of us, but now a simple majority of us are buying into it. So there is a trend across the country right now that is certainly moving, I think, threatening our values of empathy, threatening our value of democracy, and that necessitates us to put forward that value of independence. If there's going to be a prescriptive approach from the federal government saying this is how you need to live your life, and we don't agree with it, then by all means, we want to make sure that other states are able to live the way that they want to live, but that doesn't mean that we should be subjected to the same stringent requirements and values that this federal government seems to want to impose. So that's why we've adopted this independence, as one of our key values, and a lot of different ways that looks. But certainly the continued addition of states, if Donald Trump's vision for Canada and any other place that he seems to have his imperialist eye on comes to fruition, every time you add a voice to this union, it's going to continue to change the way in which the union leans, the union votes, and all of these types of things. It's not easy to say that any of these changes over time have been good or bad, but they certainly make a difference. And I think that there are states that have joined the union that never bought into the ideals of the revolution that we had, where we had a level of independence, where we had this hard dedication to democracy and local governance. I don't think that every state that joined the union had the same level of fervor for those values that we have in the Northeast.
Oh, wow. Okay, so for the states that are in the Northeast states versus the other states, now you said you were thinking about having a. Oh, I just want to ask you about. Okay, I'm sure Trump is not thinking about that, but there's unintended consequences that would happen if we would, heaven forbid, engulf Canada and make that part of us.
Mm-hmm.
So Canada is more liberal than the United States from what I understand. So I'm not sure why he wants to do that, because that would probably cause Canada they're more against him than we are. So
I completely agree with you. I have no idea why he's making this play. Unfortunately, the fascist model is to have external enemies and also to expand. There is a level of expansion and imperialism that has to occur in order for the ideology to stay alive, in order for there to always be somebody else to work and move against and assimilate. So is Canada really the next target, or is this a lot of bluster so that he has a little bit of cover to work on some other projects? I'm not sure.
Okay.
But we're hearing, I mean, every day is a new roller coaster ride in the media. You could sit on CNN's, and be watching CNN 24 hours straight and never be bored, because there's just so much coming out of the White House right now. Is it all some level of smoke and mirrors so that people are having a hard time keeping up and following along? Is he serious about every single proposal he's putting out? That's part of the mis and disinformation campaign that we're seeing. At the crux of it, I agree with you. The addition of Canada would continue to erode, in my opinion, a lean towards the Trump ideology, and I don't think it benefits him to have Canada come on as a 51st state, with the exception of, promoting the idea that they are the enemy because they will not join us.
Yeah, interesting. Wow, that's an interesting way to put it. So I'm also thinking that you're right about the expansion, because we haven't expanded for a while. It's been a while since we've incorporated a new state or territory, so some people probably think it's time, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I think that's true, and that's not a value that the YNP has. And of course, there are countries around the world, Russia being case in point right now with the invasion of Ukraine, that do continue to want that to be the paradigm around the world, where larger countries are able to bully and subsume smaller countries. I don't stand for that at the federal level. The people who are involved with the Yankee National Party so far don't want any part of it. And I think that speaks to some of the maybe more libertarian leanings that our party has. We consider ourselves to be center-left as a political party. So certainly not overboard in any given direction. We believe that the government plays a role in, regulating the economy to make sure that there are no monopolies, that there is a level of fairness and equity. But we also, we don't stand for this government overreach. We don't believe that the Pentagon's budget, where you have hundreds of billions of dollars that every year have failed audits, and where funding seems to go missing, should continue to have more money poured into it just so that we can remain some level of military superpower. For what? For a despot like Donald Trump to be able to step up and make use of it to, whether, sincerely or as a bit of a bluster, try and bully our neighbors, some of our closest allies like Canada, like Denmark with Greenland and Panama, where we've had these written agreements and joint military ventures over time that we've taken on together. The continued investment in the U.S. military structure, I think, only feeds the fuel of would-be dictators like Donald Trump to want to gravitate towards that power. So our vision for the future is, if the northeastern states are to stay with the Union, to continue to wind down our military spending so that we have an appropriate defense budget that is not geared towards offensive warfare, and to ensure that our veterans are getting the benefits that they deserve, because we so often look past that and the fact that we have veterans living in poverty and on the streets. But ultimately, if the rest of the country continues on its imperialist streak, on its desire to continue to grow, we don't want any part of it, and we'll exercise our right to move towards independence if that's the case.
So when you exercise your right to move independence, would that take the form of a vote, or how would you go about that? Would you go about that in a nonviolent way, or would it be an insurrection?
Great question. But our vision and a lot of what our party is based on is really, we use the Scottish National Party platform and approach to independence as our roadmap. Scotland, as a country within the United Kingdom, is relatively autonomous as of right now. They have their own parliament. A lot of the UK's powers have been devolved to these regional parliaments, specifically in Scotland, where they have the opportunity to make choices about their own healthcare, about their own taxes, things of that nature. So right now they're in a good spot where they have a level of autonomy, but still, active partnership within the United Kingdom and as a part of the United Kingdom. That's kind of our step one, is to move in that direction where they are right now and have our own regional Congress and legislature. But what they were able to do back in 2014 is have an independence referendum. So it was a simple yes or no vote. And, whoever received a majority of the votes, that's the way that Scotland decided to go. And it was very, very close. I believe it was within 1% or 2% that Scotland chose to stay. But having that nonviolent path, making sure that our intentions are clear well in advance here in New England and in the northeastern states, so that there's no call for violence, there's no call for insurrection, that we can all agree on a path forward and that we can all have discussions as to what does separation look like in advance, is the only way forward, in my opinion. It doesn't make sense, and our values don't allow for taking up any level of arms or having any level of violence threatened to make this happen. We believe in nonviolence, we believe in empathy, and we believe that the rest of the United States deserves to have the conversation with us. Why do we want to leave? What would make it better for us to stay? Should we stay? If there's a conversation to be had and people want to sit down and talk about it, great. I'm actually of the opinion that Donald Trump might take a look at the New England states and the northeastern states and say, hey, we're better off without him. He's been known to say things, off the cuff like that. And if our movement gets enough attention and momentum, I think that there's a possibility that this could move in an independence direction more quickly than others expect. But only time will tell.
So what would happen if your state, let's say your state, for example, would vote for the referendum that you wanted to? What term would you use to disassociate? What would be your favorite term?
I say at that point, if we're talking about an independence referendum, declare independence.
Declare independence. Okay. So declare independence if your state voted in favor of that, whether it's 50% or 66, whatever it would be in your state. If they voted in favor of that, and then how do you think the national government would react?
It's a good question. Federally, like I said, I think that there's this little part of me that thinks he's so flippant that Donald Trump and the Republican Congress might say, yeah, they voted for the other guy anyways, we don't want him. I think there's part of them that would, the more fascist authoritarian side of them would say, wait a minute, we're expanding here, not contracting. They're part of us. We're going to take up arms. Or at least, have more of a police presence and make sure that they're not leaving. So the question is, and this is why we need to have the conversation about independence up front and in public first. We need to gauge what is the reaction going to be from the federal government to this conversation around independence. And we're not alone in this, just so you know. There is actually an active petition right now in California for secession. And if they receive 500,000 signatures within 2025, I'm not sure what the exact date is, but within some period of time, it will be on their ballot at an upcoming election, whether they should concede or not. So they're ahead of us, and the California National Party is an active movement that we are in touch with, and they hold similar values to us. So we support them in their efforts. But here in the Northeast, I'm hopeful that we'll get some sort of reaction out of the federal government so that we know what we're up against, and we can make some, real educated decisions about how to pursue it based on that reaction. Because the last thing we want to do is, have this be some kind of surprise from a few of the states, have the federal government react poorly, and have it evolve into some level of violence.
Oh yeah, good. I'm glad you see it that way. You want to avoid violence if all possible.
Of course, all costs.
Great. That's a good way to be. If more people were that way in our country, that would be great.
I completely agree with you. It's a difficult time to be in politics because not only are a lot of people, I think, not feeling or are embracing political violence, but there doesn't seem to be a willingness to just sit down and listen to anybody else's ideas. It's my way or the highway, and if we could just change that, we would be a totally different country and having a totally different call right now.
Sure. Yes, and you said empathy is one of your party's values, so that would be perfect for you.
Yeah.
So, Josh, how can our audience support your party?
So right now, we have an adopted platform, but we're updating it for 2025, given recent events and what's happening on the federal stage. We have upcoming meetings on Thursday, February 13th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, as well as Thursday, February 20th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Those are held virtually. If anybody is here in some of the northeastern states and wants to hop on, our website is Yankee NP. That's YANKEENP.org. And information about how to access those meetings is on there. If you're somebody who supports our cause and you live outside the region, you don't know how to help, we're always accepting donations. We can accept donations outside the Northeast. So there's a donation page on our website. And beyond that, we're looking for people who are willing to get active and involved on our national committee. Those are going to be representatives from the several states that we are trying to organize and who are willing to run for office. So luckily, we already have a couple candidates who have expressed interest in 2025. We don't have really federal or state elections happening up here in the Northeast in that time, but we're looking at local elections this year, state and federal elections next year, and building that momentum with every step. So anybody who's interested in this, reach out, make yourself known. We certainly have a way that you can get active and involved to the extent that you are interested. And if you believe in the values of independence, democracy, empathy, and sustainability, you're one of us. So whether you've been a Democrat in the past, Republican in the past, doesn't matter. Let's put that aside and talk about what's best for the people of our states. And make a good future together.
Sounds like a good call. So may people respond to your call. That would be great. We wish your party traction and success and a lot of steps moving forward.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everything that you do to give that alternative party a voice, make us heard.
Great. Thank you again for coming on the podcast. We wish you all the best in everything you do in your personal and professional life.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye now.
Take care. Bye.